Over the years, there's been a great deal of video games based on other people's artistic works. We've seen more movie tie-ins than we care to recall, games based on television shows, both fiction and non, and there have been the odd one or two inspired by books and tabletop role-playing games. Every so often, however, a game comes along whose premise has been plucked from the most bizarre of places, and whether they're intended as serious attempts to break into the industry, or are just long adverts with button prompts, we're still left scratching our heads wondering who came up with them. For this list, we're taking a look at the titles that are based on unusual properties, and though the very definition of unusual is subjective, we're going for the stuff that wouldn't make you immediately think, wow, I'd love to play a video game version of that. I'm Ashton from Triple Jump, and here are 10 video games based on weird source materials. Number 10, Ring, The Legend of Nibelungen. Wagner's opera, Der Ring der Nibelungen. You might recall Ring, The Legend of Nibelungen from our recent Worst Games of 1999 video for one of two reasons. Firstly, its pronunciation utterly confounded Tiny Peter, and me as well, and secondly, it's based on a somewhat peculiar source. Based on Richard Wagner's work, Der Ring der Nibelungen, Ring, The Legend of Nibelungen, loosely, and boy do we mean loosely, retells the story of the 19th century opera. In Wagner's version, the plot revolves around a magical ring, and the god Wotan's struggle to initially steal it from its creator, then steal it back from the various parties whose hands it falls into. On the other hand, the video game is set in the 40th century, and though it has elements of the original tale running through it, the entire thing is set against a science fiction background, in which an alien race has taken over the world. Although space opera is a very well populated genre of video games, with the likes of Mass Effect and Knights of the Old Republic fitting the category, we're struggling to think of any other titles besides Ring that fit into the straight up opera territory. If you think of any, do let us know. Number 9, Sneak King, Burger King. I don't think I can recall a time I've been munching on a Whopper and thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if I could sneak up to people dressed like something out of a nightmare and shove this in their face? Well, at least not since I started therapy. Clearly, some bright spark down at Burger King HQ had this exact notion when they came up with Sneak King, a stealth title for the Xbox 360 that could be purchased alongside a value meal for a short time in 2006. If so inclined, hungry gamers could also buy Pocket Bike Racer and Big Bumpin', two other 360 titles also developed by the fast food giant. Set over 4 different levels, Sneaky King puts players into the shoes of the titular monarch and has them cunningly deliver food to a bunch of hungry people, who can be identified by the burger floating above their heads. Points are awarded based on how hungry the NPC is and the flourish with which they present their tasty treats. The big twist, however, is that if the NPC sees the king, they immediately lose their appetite. I'll be honest, Burger King, I don't think this is the glowing endorsement you think it is. Number 8, Chex Quest, Chex Cereal. We're sticking in Advergaming Town for just a little bit longer with Chex Quest, a game that I wouldn't like to call a Doom clone without shame, but in fairness, it is a total conversion of the 1993 parent upsetting shooter, so my statement isn't completely unfounded. Plus, most of the press said it at the time, so it's not just me. Released in North America in 1996 for Microsoft Windows and MS-DOS, Chex Quest is perhaps most notable for being the first video game ever given away with a breakfast cereal. In terms of narrative, the game is set on the distant planet of Bazoik, and follows protagonist, the Chex Warrior, as he attempts to save the planet from the invading Flemoids, all while kitted out in snazzy cereal-shaped armour. Although critics didn't have very nice things to say about Chex Quest, those who played the game in a non-professional capacity enjoyed it very much. And though the game itself is nothing more than Doom with Chex branding, there's no denying that it was an innovative way to sell cereal. If you're desperate to have a go at Chex Quest, it's available on Steam completely free. Though if you're thinking of getting your hands on a physical version, well, you'd better get saving those pennies. Number 7, Chase the Chuckwagon, Purina Dog Food. Perhaps one of the earliest examples of a game based on a weird property is 1983's Chase the Chuckwagon for the Atari 2600. A game distributed by pet food company Purina, canine-loving kiddos, or adults, in the early 80s could acquire the game by simply mailing in proof that they'd purchased a Purina product, and as a reward for their efforts, the company would send them a copy of the game. Like most games of the time, the premise is very simple. Players control a small white dog called Chucky and must guide him through various mazes in order to get him to the Chuck Wagon, a small van full of dog food. There's a time limit on each level, 30 or 60 seconds depending on the difficulty you choose, and Chucky is hindered by flying bones and the dog catcher. Find your way out of the maze and Chucky is rewarded with a delicious bowl of puppy chow. Though the origins are stranger than most, Chase the Chuck Wagon isn't an awful game. And though not the rarest game for the Atari 2600, it's still worth a pretty penny to your average collector. Better start rifling through those old cartridges, boys and girls. You could be sitting on a small fortune. Number 6, EastEnders. EastEnders. For anyone outside of the UK who may be unfamiliar with the BBC show EastEnders, it's a long-running soap opera focusing on the lives of the residents of Albert Square, a fictional area of East London. There's been a number of shocking storylines over the years, for example the whole Who Shot Phil Mitchell arc and the classic You Ain't My Mother! Yes I am! It's British drama at its finest, I tell you. Despite its world-class writing and fine acting, however, the whole thing doesn't exactly lend itself to being translated into a video game. Or at least, that was what the world thought, right up until Maxon Software released EastEnders the arcade game in 1987. It turns out though that those naysayers were 100% correct with their assumptions, because EastEnders the arcade game is atrociously bad. In it, the protagonist must assist the resident of Albert Square with various things, from helping out at the laundrette to trimming flowers at the allotment. All of these tasks are carried out through a minigame with a time limit, and points are awarded for a good performance. It's a laughably poor attempt to cash in on a beloved British institution, and it's quite frankly one game you wouldn't feel bad about pushing off a cliff. Number 5, Armjo, Les Miserables. If you've ever watched Les Mis, you know the plot doesn't exactly scream video game, owing mostly to all of the depressing themes, singing and people crying. Somewhat bafflingly, not only is Armjo based on the Tony Award-winning musical, but it's a fighting game. Yes, you heard that correctly, Armjo is a Street Fighter-style fighting game in which players pit the likes of Jean Valjean and Javert against one another. Though the game is unlicensed and has never seen an official release, it's become somewhat of a cultural phenomenon, probably on the basis that the whole thing is utterly crackers. The game was developed by a fan known only as Takase, and is ostensibly named for the Japanese expression Muju, which is a term that laments the impermanence and cruelty of the world, not unlike Les Mis. Although the game may be a parody, a great deal of effort clearly went into it. Armjo controls well, the animation style is striking, and the characters are well researched, each one equipped with a special move that relates directly to their musical counterpart. It's certainly a bizarre concept, but considering just how much silly fun Armjo is, we can't be too mad at it. Number 4, America's Army, US Army recruitment. Although military shooters are nothing new, video games being used as a military recruitment tool is certainly a new one on us. Though in fairness, we're probably not their target audience. The debate rages on over the morality of using fancy marketing to encourage people to join the army, and some have argued that games like America's Army constitute nothing short of propaganda, arguing that such media encourages people to join the military without fully understanding the risks to both their physical and mental health. Regardless of where you sit on the ethical side of things, by all accounts, America's Army isn't a half-bad game. In terms of gameplay, it's a multiplayer round-based tactical shooter that aims to provide as real of an experience of combat as possible in order to allow players to determine if the military life is right for them. Aside from the squad-based combat, players can also undertake optional modules that teach them how to drive the HMMWV, qualified to use the CROWS system, and even perform medical procedures. The medical training on offer in the game is so realistic that a number of people have come forward and claimed they've used it in real-world scenarios to save the lives of others. And they say video games turn you stupid. Ha! Number 3, Blasphemous, the religious art and iconography of Seville, Spain. Perhaps calling the inspiration for the 2019 Metroidvania title Blasphemous weird is not the right descriptor, but if nothing else, it certainly is niche. The game itself follows a character known only as the Penitent One, a member of the religious order called the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, as he embarks on a pilgrimage after the other members of his order are murdered. Being the Metroidvania sort, Blasphemous is a 2D side-scroller populated by platforms, beasties and bosses. According to the game's creative director Enrique Cabeza, Blasphemous was inspired by religious art and iconography from the city of Seville in Spain. The game's setting, Custodia, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is highly influenced by Roman Catholicism and the region of Andalusia, and other elements of the story and design also drew inspiration from a number of painters, including Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, Juan Luna and Francisco Goya. The latter's work, A Procession of Flagellants, is said to have provided a good chunk of the inspiration. The result was a game that received a great deal of praise upon its release, with critics particularly commending Blasphemous' visual style, which is dark and macabre, but in a strangely beautiful sort of way. Number 2, Pestterminator, the Western Exterminator. Pest control company Western Exterminator. I'm not going to lie, but I feel like there isn't a lot of crossover between people who need pest control services and those that enjoy playing the sort of video game where you whack small creatures with a hammer. Still, it turns out there was a market, albeit a rather small one, for Pestterminator, the Western Exterminator, a side-scroller in which the objective is to dispatch as many small critters as you can. Developed by Color Dreams and released in 1990, the game was intended to be an advertisement for pest control company Western Exterminator. The premise is straightforward. Players step into the shoes of Colonel Cleanup, a top hat wearing gent armed with a big mallet, whose job it is to save people's homes from various creatures. Throughout each stage, players have a target number of pests to exterminate before they ultimately come face to face with big bad evil guy, Ronnie the Rat. Most people who played Pestterminator the Western Exterminator agree that it wasn't very good, presumably owing to its repetitive gameplay, limited appeal, and the fact that the box boasted 9 levels of tedium when players only ended up with 8. Colonel Cleanup remains on the company's website to this day, so at least he didn't embarrass himself too badly. And number 1, the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall. It's not uncommon for developers to use real-world events as a basis for their games, but these typically tend to be focused on long-running combat situations like World War II, rather than a single occurrence. It's for that reason that we remain utterly baffled that the developer Kaneko thought it would be a good idea to release a game based on the fall of the Berlin Wall. For those unfamiliar with the structure, the Berlin Wall was a 14-foot high concrete barrier that entirely encircled West Berlin between 1961 and 1989, completely cutting the area off from East Germany. Following much public outcry, on the 9th of November 1989, the East German government announced that people could begin freely moving again. Crowds formed, and over the course of many weeks, people started chipping away at the wall. The arcade game, The Berlin Wall, glosses over a huge amount of the backstory and gets straight to the demolition. The players take control of a small boy with a hammer and must break apart the blocks that form the stage, which will then cause the monsters patrolling the wall to fall down. Hang on, monsters? At the Berlin Wall? What? It turns out that I am, in fact, reading the script correctly, and the aim of the game is not really to destroy the wall, but to dispatch all of the monsters in the level. Utterly ridiculous.